Tam. The glen was silent, still, deep. There was not a sound to be heard. Tam stood in the dark, waiting. There was absolutely nothing to be heard. The pools, just over the brow of the next but one ridge, were a favourite spot of Aen's to bathe. If she wasn't there, she was likely one glen over, in the abandoned ruins, warming herself on a fire. At least she has a brother with her, Tam thought. Tam's son might be the older, by 2 years, but it was Aen who was the stronger. A fine wife she will make for somebody soon, Tam thought, as he sped silently over the hillside, a knife in his boot and a dirk at his belt. Rather, I pity the poor man she marries. He will be given what for. He smiled at his daughter's ways. She was strong, beautiful. She took after his wife, Aoife, but for the life of him he couldn't see her as a crofter's wife, or the wife of a clansman from the next valley. His stride brought him to the brow of the first ridge. It was barely a hill, to him anyway. A full, bloated moon looked down through drifting clouds. The faintest of breezes blew, surprisingly mild, and he could hear the wind in the heather. No chattering of voices, no footsteps rushing homewards. He smiled, briefly. Neither of his children was stupid. Callum worked the land beside him. The boy was only 15, nearly a man. He had his own deck, had killed stray sheep, knew how to gut a sheep, could bring a crow down with a slingshot, knew he had to act as protector to his sister until she was safely married to a man Tam trusted. Aen. Tam bit his lip. Aen was as beautiful as his Aoife had been. More so, perhaps, though it was hard to bear. Aoife had been so full of life, so vivacious, as Aen was. But Aen was no his wife, his betrothed, his beloved. Aen was his daughter, and he had to protect her and raise her pure until he could find a man her equal in the lowlands. Tam stopped, one foot raised, frozen in mid-air. There was a scent on the breeze, the tang of iron, but diluted. He could taste the tarn in the air, the deep, dark pool, near frozen much of the year, but pure and so cold. The scent was intermingled with that of the tang. He set off again, even faster than before, fast, but no without taking care. There were many abandoned valleys and glens. Lawless, homeless men had taken to sheltering in them when the weather was bad, when times were rough. Tam flattened himself, crossing the brow of the hill. The tarn was visible below, but to anyone watching from there, so was he visible. He dropped height rapidly, no keeping to the beaten paths, heading not for the nearest point, which could be expected by any watching and waiting, but a point halfway round. The scent was stronger now, and there was noise with it. He could not identify the sounds, he had no wish to, no time to stop, no desire to stop and consider, and so he hurried on, dirk in one hand, dagger in the other. The tarn was close, an ancient, cold, dark place where he had swum in younger days, a place where Aoife had swum, a place where, hidden in the undergrowth, he had observed Aoife swimming all those years ago. He tracked the scent and the sound, working on instinct. His children were at risk. His children were under threat. He burst out onto the bank of the tarn and stopped. His daughter lay pale, loveless, lifeless, on the loch's edge, her feet still in the water. Aoife, his beloved Aoife, had swum naked in the loch, and Ain had taken after her, and that was her undoing. The man crouched atop her, his purpose plain, and Tam charged. The man raised his head at the last moment, and Tam recognised him at the last minute, a noble crashing into him, throwing the man backwards into the loch. There was the sound of a charge, a man-at-arms, a bodyguard of the nobleman. Tam rose into the man's charge, blocking him, delivering the knife into his stomach and wrenching it out, pushing the man away. Ain lifted one hand, speaking, but he could not hear. The noble was coming out of the tarn, but beyond him, worse, a body in recognisable clothing floated face down in the water. "My son!" Tam screamed. "My daughter! You bastard!" He drove at the noble, slicing his arm and cutting his face, but even in half undress the man was sharp and flighty on his toes. The nobleman laughed, calling for his man, a Saxon noble. Tam leapt at the so-called noble, driving the dirk into the man's chest, slashing at his throat with a knife. The man gave a gargled cry, falling backwards into the loch. Tam cleaned the blades on his tunic, wading out to bring his son's body in. His neck had been slit from behind, a betrayer's action. Tam laid his son next to his daughter. Her face was cold. Her eyes now gazed past him at the bloated moon. She was like her mother in so many ways. It had been so long. He reached out, closing his children's eyes.